George Harrison, often seen as the quiet Beatle, carried a complexity that went far beyond his serene public persona. He rarely raised his voice, seldom lashed out in interviews, and maintained an aura of calm, even amid the chaos of Beatlemania. Yet beneath this meditative exterior lay a personal, silent bitterness that grew over time. While John Lennon and Paul McCartney dominated the band's creative direction, George quietly absorbed, observed, and learned, often suppressing his own desires to contribute fully. This quiet resentment was personal, stemming not from malice, but from being overshadowed, from the feeling that his ideas were constantly second-guessed or overlooked. George's journey from Liverpool schoolboy to global superstar was marked by humility, discipline, and resilience, but it was also shadowed by frustration, a struggle to be heard, and a lifelong tension between admiration and resentment toward his bandmates, particularly Paul McCartney. Early days in Liverpool, George Harrison's musical journey began as a teenager in Liverpool, riding the school bus where he met Paul McCartney. Their shared love of skiffle and rock and roll created a bond that would become foundational to the Beatles. McCartney, confident and assertive, contrasted with George's quiet, impressionable nature, which initially drew him toward Paul's energy and later, John Lennon's brilliance. Joining Lennon's Quarrymen in 1958 at age 15 was a turning point, though Lennon initially doubted George's abilities due to his youth. A second audition arranged by McCartney changed everything when George flawlessly played the lead guitar line from Ranchy, impressing Lennon and securing his place. Even at this early stage, George was entering a narrative largely shaped by others. Lennon and McCartney's dominant personalities set the tone for the band, while George followed, learning and absorbing. For years, he adapted to their vision, delaying the full expression of his own creativity, a choice that would later feed his quiet, simmering frustration. The shadow of Lennon and McCartney. As the Beatles rose to fame, George earned the nickname the Quiet Beatle, though this label belied a deeper tension. Lennon and McCartney's partnership defined the band, crafting songs, setting standards, and controlling the creative direction. George, though talented, often felt sidelined. His ideas were frequently passed over, his guitar arrangement second-guessed, and his attempts at songwriting marginalized. Paul's perfectionism, though not malicious, sometimes overshadowed George's confidence, causing him to later remark that McCartney ruined me as a guitar player. Admiration for his bandmates slowly turned into quiet resentment. George's musical and spiritual explorations demanded space that the band environment often denied him. The early deference and patience he showed gave way to simmering frustration, a realization that his contributions were undervalued despite his skill. These years planted seeds of bitterness that would grow into more visible conflicts in the late 1960s, shaping his emotional and creative path as a musician seeking recognition beyond the Lennon-McCartney shadow. Rising frustration in the studio. By the late 1960s, George's quiet patience began to fracture. The White Album sessions in 1968 revealed tensions that had been building for years. George had grown as a songwriter and demanded recognition for his work, yet the studio environment remained dominated by Paul's precise control and Lennon's growing distraction with Yoko Ono. Disagreements over arrangements, particularly Paul's tendency to direct George's guitar parts, highlighted the creative suffocation he felt. In the Let It Be sessions, one infamous confrontation over Two of Us captured his calm but pointed resistance. "I'll play whatever you want me to play, or I won't play at all, if that's what you want." This statement wasn't sarcasm. It was resignation, a subtle acknowledgement that he was exhausted from years of compromise. These moments demonstrated how George's internal struggle had intensified, balancing professionalism with deep personal frustration. For George, the battle wasn't public. It was private, a silent assertion of his worth within a band that often failed to grant him space. Temporary departure and creative triumph. The tension reached a breaking point on January 10, 1969, when George temporarily quit the Beatles during the Let It Be sessions. Feeling undervalued and creatively stifled, he needed distance to regain his sense of autonomy. His return under renegotiated terms marked a turning point, and he began producing some of his most celebrated work. including Something in Here Comes the Sun. These songs reflected his matured voice as a songwriter and the creative clarity he achieved when left to his own devices. Yet, the emotional damage lingered. George's resentment toward Paul was now part of a permanent internal landscape. Even as he contributed masterfully to the Beatles' final works, a part of him had mentally detached. This period illustrates how artistic suppression can breed both genius and bitterness. George's quiet assertion of independence became a defining moment, proving that creative liberation requires not only talent but space, respect, and the courage to assert oneself in the face of long-standing control. Solo career and artistic independence. After the Beatles' breakup in 1970, George channeled years of sidelined creativity into his solo work, most notably the album All Things Must Pass in 1971. This triple album featured songs rejected during his Beatles tenure and became a commercial and critical triumph. Tracks such as Wah Wah served as subtle critiques of Paul's controlling nature, while other songs reflected broader frustrations with the band's dynamics and legal entanglements. George's solo work allowed him to reclaim creative control, express personal and spiritual insights, and assert his identity as an artist independent of the Beatles' framework. These years also revealed his complex relationship with collaboration. He could work with musicians he respected, but the shadow of past suppressions remained. The solo period illustrates George's resilience and determination to convert personal and professional frustration into artistic brilliance, a quiet rebellion that ultimately expanded his legacy beyond the limitations of his early years with the band. The complicated Lennon bond. George's relationship with John Lennon was equally nuanced and emotionally charged. Initially, Lennon was a mentor, encouraging Harrison's songwriting and fostering experimentation. Over time, however, Lennon's growing absorption with personal matters, particularly Yoko Ono, led to emotional distance. Unlike Paul, whose perfectionism smothered creativity, Lennon's indifference created a subtle but persistent wound. George's spiritual pursuits and exploration of Indian music were met with sarcasm rather than curiosity, leaving him feeling unseen. The estrangement deepened over the years, and George's memoir, I, Me, Mine, reflected the minimal attention he gave Lennon in recounting their shared history, signaling the significance of this emotional distance. The complexity of their relationship underscores that mentorship, admiration, and friendship in creative partnerships can evolve into tension when personal priorities shift. For George, Lennon remained both an early guide and a source of pain, a reminder that relationships can scar quietly, even amid mutual respect and genius. Reunions and lingering tensions. Despite the passage of decades, old dynamics with Paul McCartney never fully dissipated. During the 1994 Beatles Anthology project, George reunited with Paul and Ringo Starr to complete unfinished demos. While the collaboration was professional, the old patterns resurfaced. George bristled under Paul's direction, rolling his eyes at controlling tendencies. Publicly, McCartney acknowledged minor annoyances, but privately, the tension highlighted the persistence of past grievances. George's comments, dry and philosophical, often conveyed subtle critique without overt hostility. Even in later years, he maintained distance in spirit, selectively engaging with the past while preserving personal boundaries. These interactions reveal how formative conflicts in collaborative relationships can echo across decades, influencing both creative expression and emotional equilibrium. For George, reconciliation was measured, cautious, and incomplete, a reflection of a lifetime of navigating admiration, rivalry, and personal dignity alongside genius peers. Final years and legacy. George Harrison's final years were marked by reflection, illness, and quiet philanthropy. Diagnosed with throat cancer in 1997, he faced his mortality with dignity and humor, often expressing himself through music and spiritual practice. His death on November 29, 2001, was surrounded by family and close friends, and his final words, "Love one another," captured his lifelong pursuit of peace despite personal and professional complexities. While public displays of reconciliation with Paul McCartney were limited, private moments suggested a tentative, human acknowledgement of shared history. Harrison's legacy encompasses not only his guitar mastery and songwriting brilliance, but also the subtle, often private struggles of creative collaboration. Through decades of fame, tension, and reflection, George remained a quiet rebel, a spiritual seeker, and an artist committed to his vision. His story reveals that silence can carry profound meaning, and that the personal cost of genius often remains unseen beneath public triumph.